Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Very happy to have you here today to talk about RFPs and procurement for energy management and information systems. I am Elliot Crow, Technical Assistance Coordinator working on the Smart Energy Analytics campaign. I'm standing in here today for Hannah Kramer, who would have been doing an expert job of leading this webinar, but she is unfortunately down with some laryngitis today. So we send our best regards to Hannah. What we're going to be covering today, I will give a very brief overview of the Smart Energy Analytics campaign and specifically a few words on the EMIS procurement resources we have on offer. But of course, you're all here to see and hear from our featured speaker, Edna Lawrence from Beaumont Health, who will be sharing with us some of the best practices they have implemented. We hope to have plenty of time for Q&A and would really welcome anyone's comments and questions throughout the presentation. And as always, we never get through them all, so be sure to get them in early. So the campaign, the goal of the Smart Energy Analytics campaign is to support increased owner adoption of EMIS and monitoring-based commissioning. We support advancing EMIS beyond monthly billing analysis, which is a great best practice, but we're trying to move people beyond that to have them analyze interval meter data and using fault detection diagnostics tools. Through our work there, we support new installations of EMIS as well as anyone who's expanding or developing an existing EMIS. From a research perspective, we also have a goal to provide cost savings and EMIS use metrics that aren't readily available to the public, and that really helps people clearly determine the business case. Year 2 research results from the campaign were shared last fall in a webinar, which you can download, and each year our research report includes more and more data from campaign participants. So right now we're up to 87 organizations, totaling over 420 million gross square feet floor area. Something that people are very interested in is the recognition opportunities. I'll be saying a bit more about that on the next couple of slides. And always like to mention that we are still accepting new participants. So please consider joining us, or if you're already participating in the campaign, we'd love to get your referrals. I briefly mentioned recognition. So we have 4 spring recognition categories. We have an awards window open right now for applications. We're looking at people telling us about their best practices, innovative practices, energy performance success stories, and also we have a recognition category for the largest portfolio. And we'll be pushing out the awards in May. So get your applications in by the end of next month, and hopefully you'll be in the running for that. For anyone who does get recognized through the campaign, we write up a brief success story. On the screen here you'll see one of our recent winners, Stanford University. And we have about 17 of these success stories written up to date. They're a great resource. Whether you're going for awards or not, it's certainly good to see some great stories from other people. You may find people in that list that are like you, that you want to say, well, hey, I want to be like that. Let's see about procuring some EMIS. So please take a look at that. So in terms of when you're creating an RFP or a scope of work for EMIS, it's important to identify what features you want in a system. So on the screen here, looking at some examples of energy information systems that are using interval data. With these, you can look for energy use patterns at the hourly level, look at how those patterns change across the seasons, and top right here, a heat map is a great tool for that. You can also use these kind of tools to set consumption targets to see if you're saving energy from hour to hour. And these are particularly helpful for people that have multiple energy sources on site, maybe even some on-site generation. People really need to get their head around all the different data sources and make sense of those. There are countless types of charts, a lot of flexibility, but at the core, these tools are looking at hourly data at the whole building or sub-meter level with some embedded analytics and dashboards to help target your efforts. The other main category I mentioned, fault detection and diagnostics tools. These are kind of tools that take your building automation system data and look to help you optimize systems. They really go far beyond just a building automation system giving you an alarm to say a set point's out of range. These are looking at multiple parameters continuously to let you know if something's out of whack. When was it out of whack? Is it consistent? Is it the same day of the week, etc.? It really gets very, very granular. And if you're looking at these kind of tools, it's really important to think about what kind of visuals you want to summarize the faults, what kind of faults and what kind of systems you want to cover, etc. And if you're developing a scope of work, you really want to think about those kind of issues. Similarly, you might want to think about, how do you want the findings summarized? So here's an example of a summary screen for FDD that just gives you your top 5 by cost impact, and that can be very useful for prioritizing your actions in response to having these kind of FDD tools. Talking about back to the Smart Energy Analytics campaign, we have plenty of RFP and procurement resources, most of which are posted on the campaign website, so you can find templates that are easy to use and adapt for your own needs. We have a page where you can look at available tools. We do not approve or endorse any kind of tools, but we at least try and capture the full range of EAS and FDD and other tools that are out there. We also have a section on service providers there too. To the third bullet on this screen here, we also have the campaign reporting. So the analysis of our year 2 campaign data was reported out in a webinar late last year. We'll have a formal journal article coming out later this year, but for now you can actually find a lot of really useful data, which if you're developing your own RFPs or making the internal business case, you may find that data very useful. What we also have for people that are already participating in the campaign, we can provide you with some example RFPs based on anonymized examples we've gathered over the last couple of years. You'll see on screen a very wide range here, so whatever you're looking for, we may have some good examples for you. So please, if you're in the campaign, you're interested in these, give us a call. We can talk through which ones may fit your needs best. And again, that's just for campaign participants. All right, as I introduce Edna in just a moment here, just want to draw your attention to how you can submit questions. As I mentioned, we love to get your questions, and you can do that just using the chat function and submit questions to us. We generally will save all those until the end, but if there's something urgent and pressing, we'll look out for it and interrupt if we need to. And without further ado, I'll introduce Edna Lawrence. Edna is the System Energy Manager for Beaumont Health. In the role of Energy Manager, Edna is responsible for setting energy reduction goals, benchmarking hospital performance, and identifying opportunities for improved energy efficiency. Edna is a professional engineer in the state of Illinois, a LEED accredited professional, and a certified energy manager. With that, I'll hand you over to Edna.
Hi, thanks, Elliot. Just looking forward to sharing some of our lessons learned with everyone on the line today. So I guess we'll start off with just a little bit about Beaumont Health. So Beaumont is a not-for-profit organization formed in September of 2014 by Beaumont Health System, Boxford Healthcare, Oakwood Healthcare. The mission is to provide patients with extraordinary, compassionate care no matter where they live in Southeast Michigan. So Beaumont basically covers most of Southeast Michigan, just north of Ann Arbor. We really kind of make a donut around Detroit in terms of our service area. The organization consists of about 8 hospitals with 3,429 beds, 187 outpatient sites, nearly 5,000 physicians. We have over 38,000 employees and are looking to hire, and then about 3,500 volunteers. So it's a growing organization. The health system comprises of 8 hospitals, and each hospital is conveniently named after the city in which it's located. And as I mentioned previously, there are 187 and growing outpatient sites. So why did Beaumont want to pursue monitoring-based commissioning? Essentially, back in 2016, the current energy management program began at Beaumont, and at that time, we were tasked with reducing the energy cost of all 8 hospitals by 17% relative to a 2015 baseline. And then, of course, any energy savings projects we came up with could not impact, patient, family, or medical staff comfort, health, or safety. Our program really consisted, or has consisted of in the past of basically using standard energy conservation measure identification techniques. So that includes operator interviews at the hospitals, doing equipment cataloging, walking through the hospitals, basically looking for anything that jumps out at you, like old fluorescent lighting or old equipment, and really the way that we justify projects is by doing energy savings calculations, and the savings are calculated basically based on equipment nameplate data. If we have any BAS trend data, we use that. We use historic weather data, and then also operational assumptions. So basically all of our savings criteria right now and what we count towards our savings goal is all based off of calculated information. In terms of validating whether or not we're actually seeing the savings that we're calculating, we really only have whole building utility data available to us. We do have our local utility, electric utility, DTE, does provide interval data, so daily interval data is available there, and we are able to weather normalize that using regression techniques in Excel. However, it's really nowhere near real time. So we really aren't able to react to spikes or increases in energy consumption. And so basically, our issue is how do we actually validate our energy savings, especially since since our savings can be hard to see. Because our operations are always growing. The hospitals are adding square footage. We're increasing our surgical volume at the hospitals. Are trying to increase the number of patients we see, and we're also adding services. For example, at our Royal Oak facility, we just added state-of-the-art proton cancer therapy, laser beam, just uses a ton of energy. So our energy consumption is increasing despite our efforts in some cases to reduce the energy consumption as well. So basically, how do we validate in some cases avoided consumption? Additionally, another consideration when we were looking at monitoring-based commissioning is that Beaumont does have some experience with commissioning in general. And in fact, we had actually participated in utility-funded retro-commissioning at 3 of our hospitals, and we did see what we consider pretty moderate energy savings in that case. Basically, we saw almost 4% energy savings across 3 hospitals. Again, this is a calculated number, and with a projected ROI of less than 0.3 years. So really, we saw that basically there's a lot of opportunity on the low, no-cost side of these hospitals to further reduce our energy consumption. But we knew that without the proper tools in place, that we're likely to not see those savings persist over time. And for Beaumont, what persistence of savings means is ensuring that that those energy conservation measures that we put into place during retro commissioning stay implemented. And if there is a deficiency with an energy conservation measure, that deficiency is documented, and then we can work to resolve it. For example, just this past Friday, we had one of our hospitals was getting audited by the utility provider for our, as part of the retro commissioning process or as part of the follow-up to the retro commissioning process. And we found that one of the air handling units that had been previously put on a schedule had been taken off of the schedule because the comm closet was overheating. However, I found out that that schedule was implemented last February, and the schedule then was removed in August. So to me, that says that really there wasn't an issue until August. And so maybe we could do something different with the way we schedule that equipment. Maybe we leave it on in very hot, outside weather conditions, but we still keep the schedule in place. And without knowing that that schedule was removed in August, it has since been running 24/7 until until right now. And so we're again looking at being able to basically address, like, if something isn't working, why isn't it working, and can we find a solution that is maybe halfway between, not turning something off or always keeping it on. So, and then the final reason that we decided to look at monitoring-based commissioning and EMIS software solutions was that being a large energy consumer, I think we were prime targets for a lot of EMIS vendors to come talk to us about the types of savings they thought they could help us achieve. And some vendors were claiming, they could reduce our utility consumption, anywhere between 10 and 20%. And this really caught our attention because this types of savings really aligns with our goals. But at the same time, when anyone promises this level of savings, you got to really have to wonder, is this too good to be true? Especially since we did the retro commissioning when we think we already hit some of the low-hanging fruit. So how much more low-hanging fruit really is there to get? Additionally, would a vendor guarantee this type of savings? And then also, like, what type of time frame would it require to realize this type of savings? Would we spend a year or two just implementing the software, getting metering in place, and then not realize savings until 3 years out? And then additionally, how much would we have to spend? How much would we have to spend from our expense accounts? What kind of capital investment would monitoring system cost? And then what kind of services would we be getting? Again, like as someone who is familiar with monitoring-based commissioning, I found that I was often sitting in a room and listening to these guys and really enjoying the conversation, really enjoying the people I was talking to. But I found I was projecting what I wanted onto what these folks were telling me that they could provide. And so really what that came to is that we need to just take a step back and then and really develop an RFP. If this was something that Beaumont really wanted to do, that we really needed to define what kind of services we wanted to receive. We needed to ask those vendors who wanted to provide us these services to really specifically address their approach to the services that we wanted. And then also we just needed to be able to sit down and do an apples to apples comparison rather than having someone tell us what they could provide. We were going to ask them to basically say, this is what we want, can you do it? And then we also, knowing the level of savings a lot of these vendors, said that they could provide us, we thought, well, okay, let's see if they'll put, their money where their mouth is. Let's see if that someone will be able to guarantee, a certain level of savings. So moving forward with an RFP, we decided to start with a pilot. In this case, we decided to start with 3 of our hospitals, 1 from each founding organization, just so that we can make sure that none of the founding organizations felt left out in this process. And then here I wanted to plug a little bit what Elliot was talking about before regarding the EMIS RFP resources that can be found on the Smart Energy Analytics campaign. When we started the RFP and actually trying to put stuff down on paper, it felt really overwhelming. And, knowing that there were so much, basically so many capabilities out there, regarding what specific vendors could provide and, what the options were for us in terms of what we really wanted. And so having the technical specifications available through the Smart Energy Analytics campaign was extremely helpful for me specifically in writing what and indicating what Beaumont really wanted in terms of an EMIS and monitoring-based commissioning type service. So in terms of this, is just an example of what what the technical specifications look like from the Smart Energy Analytics campaign. But I really, again, I really appreciated the format. Everything in gray is basically their guidance. It's basically it's a real simple copy paste type template. You can delete what you want. You can add what you want. And then the blue boxes were really helpful in terms of what considerations to take into place as you're kind of editing their document. And I found that basically our I went back just recently and looked at our technical specs against what the Smart Energy Analytics campaign provided, and it's pretty much a copy and paste. But we did edit quite a few, so it's definitely very heavily drawn from this document. So in terms of the technical specifications that were most important to Beaumont, for us, kind of going back to some of the limitations of our current program, is looking at the normalization of energy consumption. So we're already doing basic weather normalization with some of our data. We're also using Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but we're seeing in some cases, hospitals with increased surgical volume, even though we've implemented some pretty aggressive energy conservation measures, such as retrofitting lights or replacing parking lot light fixtures with LED. We're not seeing the types of savings we were hoping for, but at the same time, that hospital has increased its surgical procedures by 20% year over year. And so it's kind of like we really want to understand how we're using energy, and maybe if we're increasing our patient volume, increasing our surgical volume, that it would also provide valuable data to us in terms of how we're consuming energy. And again, that feeds right into the measurement and verification piece. So as we're doing implementing energy conservation measures, looking at being able to measure and verify the energy consumption of those ECMs, whether or not that be installing sub-meters or ideally using the data that we have in place from our building automation system. So looking at if we can pull wattages or kWh off of VFDs, using that, using basically calculated or virtual meters to validate our energy savings for specific measures. Additionally, we wanted to be able to compare our energy consumption across all the hospitals in our portfolio, but also, more importantly, in some cases, given the age range and size ranges and capabilities of our hospitals, is being to look at our hospital energy consumption, by hospital year over year. So that was, pretty basic, but very important type of capability that we were looking for. And then the other thing we were looking at is, detection of operational faults in our systems and equipment. And so the operational faults could be, we were thinking along the lines of, is something just not working the way it should be? Is the mixed air temperature really high or really low? And it had an air handling unit, so does that mean our outside air damper is stuck open or stuck closed? And so being able to identify, issues like that. But then also what became increasingly important as we began selling this to some of our operational staff is, using the fault detection diagnostic software to automatically generate work orders. And so having that software communicate directly with their work order generation system was also going to be an important aspect, because not only do we want to be able to identify issues, we want to also make sure that those issues can be diagnosed, and then we can come up with actionable, a way to actually go about fixing the problem, as opposed to letting basically a BAS alarm sit there flashing red at us for a long time. So that's where we're at with the technical specifications. Something that wasn't included in the Smart Energy Analytics campaign resources were consulting requirements. And so the document that we ended up putting together ended up being more like a scope of work as opposed to just a strict technical specification document. But basically we found it to be useful to define how we thought the project should be run. And then ask the bidders or the vendors to respond to our our request for the project phasing. So we looked at basically 3 separate project phases, and we'll go into this a little bit detail in the following slides. But the phases were strategy and design, phase 2 implementation, phase 3 ongoing services, and then we also defined our meeting frequency. So we defined how often we thought the consultant should be meeting with the building staff. How often they should be on the site versus virtual, because I think conference calls are great and all, but every once in a while they should probably be on site to talk to the guys, and then how often they should be meeting with the corporate energy management team. So regarding the first phase of our consulting requirements, the strategy and design phase, during this phase it was basically we envisioned that this would be the time that we would look at initially setting our goals, so what our annual energy cost reduction goals would be for each site. Again, this is an initial guess at what we would think, that the consultants would perform their operational reviews with the building staff. The consultants would look at designing a monitoring strategy. So basically, we'd ask them to look at what our existing metering is, what our existing building automation system monitors, and then how we can get data from that setup to do some of the monitoring that we're hoping to do. And then also a detailed implementation schedule based off of what they reviewed on site. Phase 2 is the implementation phase. Basically, we're hoping what the consultant will do during this phase is connect and configure the proposed technology platform. So that includes this includes actually interfacing with Beaumont IT to get the correct security clearance, getting IP addresses. We just found out we need to put network data drops to all of our control panels where our consultant wants to place their devices. So basically, we're in the middle of phase 2 right now. If you if you didn't catch on to that, but basically, once we've got that all in place, then we're going to expect that the consultant will try to work on coordinating the data flow from the meters and from the devices they saw on site to the proposed technology software platforms. We anticipate they'll fully commission the system as well as begin the identification of energy conservation measures. And those energy conservation measures include both kind of standard retro commissioning type energy conservation measures. The anticipation here is that we would initially go through another retro commissioning type activity at all 3 hospitals with the idea that we would identify additional low, no cost savings opportunities to implement pretty immediately, as well as looking for some of the capital, the initial high payback capital opportunities as well. And then the idea here is that at the end of the phase 2, that will have also begun the implementation of the fault detection diagnostic software tool. And then the third phase is basically our ongoing services phase. And really what this is what we envisioned was that we would continue with a 3-year term after the first 2 phases. So basically, after kind of that initial retro commissioning effort, really start the monitoring-based commissioning portion of the project. And so looking at using the FDD software, using the EMIS software to really start to dig into the data that we're collecting and to identify additional opportunities for energy savings that maybe aren't initially apparent through just a standard retro commissioning effort. Throughout the 3-year term, we would look for the consultant to revise their annual energy cost reduction goals at each facility. We would anticipate that we would be doing the 24/7, 365 proactive fault detection diagnostic monitoring. And like I said before, this is really the part of the project where we're doing the monitoring-based commissioning, that we're identifying kind of the really hidden opportunities that aren't visible through typical energy conservation measure or energy auditing strategies. So on to the guarantee. So since we now kind of level set in terms of what we're looking for in terms of technology and consulting, we then kind of set forth basic guarantee requirements. And really the purpose of the guarantee is to provide Beaumont with peace of mind that whatever money we're paying out to the consultant, that we are going to get some value from it. And so these were the basic criteria for the guarantee. First one being that the guarantee would be a money back and not credit for future services, and that for every dollar short of the annual savings target, Beaumont will receive or will be reimbursed dollar for dollar. So that was kind of the 2 big criteria for my bosses when looking at terms for a guarantee. Additionally, we've put out there that the vendor will identify a minimum energy savings equal to their fees on an annual basis. And this is really the minimum energy savings part, is that in our point of view or in our eyes, the guarantee is totally valid if the consultant is only willing to guarantee that I will be able to identify energy savings equal to their fees. And then savings from implemented ECMs should remain persistent year over year, excluding the received utility rebates. And then additionally, and most importantly, I think, is that Beaumont Health, we reserved the right to validate all the recommended measures and review the calculations and assumptions. And really, the purpose of this is to validate that the energy conservation measures meet all of our criteria, in terms of return on investment, in terms of, not interfering with, regulatory requirements, not potentially having a negative impact on thermal comfort. So, that part is very important to us. In terms of the approval process for ECMs, I kind of landed out here on this flow chart. But basically, what we laid out in our guarantee language is that a project or an ECM identified by the consultant, it'll probably either be classified either as an expense project, which we have specific criteria what is considered an expense, but that generally would be considered like low no cost ECMs that generally revolve around either control programming or repair of equipment. Capital projects, on the other hand, are more, obviously capital in nature, replacements of equipment, retrofitting of equipment generally falls under the capital project criteria. But for expense projects, what we've set out in the guarantee language is that, and it's actually in our energy management policy. Beaumont's energy management policy currently states that projects, either expense or capital, have to meet this ROA requirement. So this includes projects that I recommend as the energy conservation measure, not just projects recommended by a third-party consultant. So basically, our flow chart for approving energy conservation measures, basically, are they expense or capital? Does the ROI meet our criteria? If it does that project will have a negative impact on regulatory compliance? If it doesn't, then will it impact patient or doctor thermal comfort? Because again, for a hospital at least, thermal comfort is a question that comes up on our reviews and a review called HCAPS, which I can't remember what the acronym stands for at the moment. But basically, it's a methodology that we are judged against, and refunds from the federal government are based on our scoring from that assessment. So as long as we don't affect regulatory compliance and there's no impact on thermal comfort, then we count an energy, potential energy project as potentially counting towards the guarantee. And so our guarantee, what our guarantee is versus an ESCO, I think is an important definition, because we really didn't want to go into an ESCO type agreement. The largest reason being is that Beaumont wanted to pay for or finance all of the projects that we were to implement. And I think that the important thing to realize, though, is our budgets year to year can vary widely, and we don't, especially on the facility side, don't necessarily always have complete control over what we will be able to finance in a given year. And so the guarantee is based off of savings identified instead of savings realized, with the caveat of once something has been implemented and we see, or if we stop seeing that savings is being realized year over year, we can bring that up. But basically, and then again, the consultant is minimally required to identify savings equivalent to the annual software and consulting fees. And so we found this to be pretty important with the consultant that we did end up moving forward with. that basically that their board was willing, not being an ESCO organization, their board was willing to agree to a guarantee, using those terms, but guaranteeing anything above their consulting fee. They felt like that was really moving more into ESCO territory, and it was something that organization did not feel comfortable with. And then really the other important part was that as our guarantee language, as stated, was open for discussion. And so while we laid it out there what we would like to see, it was open for discussion and open for revision, and specifically, so that we could get the language in such a way that everyone would be happy with it. So laying all that out there, the technical specification, the consulting requirements, plus the guarantee piece, we distributed the RFP to 9 pre-selected bidders, and some of those were the bidders that approached us. Some were ones that I'd done some research on and thought looked interesting. It was kind of a mixed bag. We received 6 responses. Two bidders backed out, primarily because of the bid guarantee, and then 2 other bidders joined up forces. And the folks that we submitted, the folks who submitted the RFP ran the range from EMIS, like software providers versus consultants. And what we found is that generally the response either was a full service, consulting software firm that responded, or it was a pairing up of a consulting and a software solution, was what we saw when in terms of the responses that we received. The responses were judged basically based on their ability to meet the requirements of the technical specification. Our technical specification was pretty long, and we kind of knew going into it that not a single software vendor would be able to necessarily meet every single thing we were asking for. So basically we were looking for someone who could come the closest. We also were looking for experience with similar projects, specifically in healthcare, not just because hospitals are large energy users, but we have a lot of regulatory requirements that someone with a lot of experience in office buildings or whatnot might not necessarily be aware of. So having experience in healthcare was very important to us. Whether or not they responded to the guarantee or was also it was important to us as well. Acknowledging the presence of the guarantee was a very big review point for us. And then we also looked at the projected ROI of their services based on the savings they were willing to guarantee, as well as their overall cost. Again, we used so this is an example of the proposal review matrix we used. And I actually, I think I pulled this from the Smart Energy Analytics Campaign resources as well. Again, it was updated and revised to reflect kind of what we found to be important. But I thought this was that tool was a great starting point. But basically what we did is we listed each of our evaluation criteria on the left here. We assigned a weight to each of those criteria, and then we assigned a score for each proposal, and then looked at the weighted score, and then compared the score for each light item against all of the bidders, as well as the total score. And so you can see this particular bidder. It looks like they did really great on the overall quality of their proposal. Also, they provided some pretty excellent references, but their local presence left something to be desired. So that's sort of kind of, was basically how we used this matrix. We also looked at trying to project a break-even analysis, and kind of as we were reviewing the proposals, it became obvious that depending on the fees provided, we might not be able to break even within the term of the contract. And so being able to break even within the term of the contract all of a sudden became an important criteria for us. And so So this, this is just an example, but what we did here is we looked at our cumulative cost, which is in the green dots, and then our gross cumulative savings over the contract period, which is the blue dots. And you can kind of see for this particular bidder, we had a break-even point of July 2021. So this was again based off of their guaranteed savings, and then the costs were estimated and kind of swagged based off of our projected capital and expense costs based off of the ROI savings criteria that we put forth on our energy management policy. And then finally, we also used the Smart Energy Analytics campaign year one results to kind of baseline the cost and savings projections that we received from the bidders. So what you're looking at here is on the left is the first year results of the Smart Energy Analytics campaign, the top graph being the implementation costs. Or the first year implementation costs for participants in the Smart Energy Analytics campaign, and then the reoccurring software costs are the bottom slide or the bottom graph on the left. I looked at a couple of our finalist bidders here in this case. We looked at our what their implementation costs were, so their year zero, which was essentially the phase 1 and 2 costs, and compared that against to Smart Energy Analytics campaign, as well as their kind of what would be the estimated year 4 costs. So this would be just their software costs. We anticipated, and we know for a fact that the year, the full contract term included consulting fees, and that by the time we completed the full 3-year contract with the consultant, we would be left with just the recurring software fees. And what this did is this is only the first year results, and we sort of knew that more data would probably change the numbers a little bit, but this kind of gave us a peace of mind in terms of knowing that the pricing that we were receiving from the bidders is not completely out of whack, that it wasn't too high or too low to cause concern in any direction. So it was a good kind of just level setting exercise to do this. And then finally, we looked at the use of first year results also to look at projected savings based on the guarantee level. So on the left again is the Smart Energy Analytics campaign results, and then on the right is what our finalists were coming up with in terms of savings based on their guarantees. And basically what we saw was that for the first year, in Smart Energy Analytics campaign, median savings was about 5%, and we were about 1.3 to 2.1 times. That was about 1.3 to 2.1 times the bidder 1 and bidder 2 contract guarantee for the first year. And what that really indicated to me was that the guarantees that these bidders were offering were very conservative. However, these guarantees covered their fees, and so again, that also created an additional level of comfort for for us, and that the guarantee is conservative, but it's equal to the consulting and software fees, and therefore it's highly likely that we will see additional savings. But if we don't, we know we're covered. So in conclusion, I think proceeding with the RFP process really was helpful for Beaumont, just in terms of defining what we really wanted from our service providers, and then also being able to compare specific offerings from vendors. And then finally, just the guarantee really provides peace of mind that we're going to get value out of the program. And I think additionally, the financial analysis we did on top of that, shows that there is real opportunity for Beaumont to realize significant savings from the program. But we are glad to have the guarantee in place to provide that peace of mind. So I think that's everything I had today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Edna. sorry, I went too far here. Oh, you go. We're both clicking the slides forward and back. So yeah, thanks very much for that. A really terrific presentation. I really liked the time you spent explaining the guaranteed savings approach. I don't know of any other example within the campaign of someone taking that approach. I really liked the slide, particularly where you distinguished it from the ESCO contract. I think that's a really good distinction to make. In terms of, if anyone out there is thinking of doing this approach, guaranteeing that you at least cover the cost of the consulting and software seems like a no-brainer for anyone to want to do that. I'm curious if what lessons you've learned along the way, and I know you're fairly early still in the implementation part, but have there been any kind of trade-offs or challenges with thinking in that guaranteed savings that have made it challenging for you?
That's a good question. At this point, I mean, we are still very much in the early phases of the implementation. So I would say, in reality, what happened was that phase 1 and 2 happened concurrently, and so our consultant has already moved forward with the implementation of energy conservation measures, but we are still in the process of developing an implementation plan for the hardware and software solution side of things. So I think where we're at today is we've already actually got a plan for energy conservation measures for the retro commissioning effort. And so what we're now working on doing is developing kind of our methodology for validating those energy conservation measures. But that's going to be, again, different than, I think, again, this is the kind of like the initial retro commissioning type effort. Validating those measures is going to be different than in a year when hopefully we're going to be validating measures that have been identified out of the monitoring-based or the monitoring-based commissioning program once that's fully implemented. But kind of going back to what I think you were getting at, Elliot, is that right now it looks like we're exceeding our guarantee savings, but it still has, for the first year at least, and so that it still has yet to be validated, though. So yeah, it's everything's a moving target, I feel like.
Oh, great. And in terms of that process of doing the RCX and then having the FDD as something that can help you ensure the persistence, was there much discussion around that way of doing it versus saying, well, we'll just get the FDD on board and we'll use that sort of on an ongoing basis as the commissioning part with the software? Was there much discussion around that way of doing it with the RCX first?
There was, and I think what we saw was that there was an opportunity to realize savings sooner if we pursued retro commissioning first. Because the buildings themselves, I mean, portions of these buildings can, go back to the 1950s, and so we knew there were still low-hanging fruit, opportunities in the buildings. Our Royal Oak campus is over 3 million square feet and has over 100 air handling units, and so, like a retro commissioning effort, we knew would have value over there. So I think if you have for example, if you have a newer facility that has maybe been commissioned more recently, installing the FDD software first and then, using that data, I think might make more sense. But in our case, I think there wasn't really any reason to hold back on trying to identify some of those low, no-cost kind of operational improvements that could be identified regardless of having the FDD software in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and to that specific point on the software, were you able to find many vendors who could provide a single software solution that covered all your needs, or were they generally splitting up the energy information system part from the FDD part and offering it?
We've received a variety of responses. I think mostly what we finally ended up using to kind of get straight to the point is we finally ended up going with a consultant that had recommended 2 separate software solutions for both the EMIS and the FDD. And I think the reason they went that route with their recommendation was because that was the best way to tick off most of the boxes that we were requesting. So, because in general we found that of the respondents who were just using a single software solution, they were either very strong in FDD or they were very strong in EMIS, and that maybe they had some of the other capabilities, but they're in general they weren't as strong as maybe the final combined solution that we decided to go with.
Mm-hmm. Great. And in once those 2 softwares are up and running, who do you envision is going to be using them? Obviously the consultant, of course, but I'm just wondering within Beaumont Health, who do you think will be directly interfacing with those tools? Yeah.
So currently the plan, and best laid plans, right? But currently the plan is that ideally we will have operating staff at each of the sites have access to the FDD tool for sure. And ideally what we will do is work with the operating staff to identify what sort of faults should be automatically generate work orders in their work order management system. And then so that those types of issues can automatically get a work order. So maybe it's like a frozen damper or a fan cycling on and off unexpectedly or something like that would be like an automatic work order generation. But then I'm assuming that there's going to be other faults that are detected that maybe aren't of either critical importance or don't kind of fit into that automatic category. And my hope is that we'll have someone, at least one, if not multiple people trained at each site to go into the FDD software, review the faults that have been generated, and be able to push, prioritize them based off of, projected savings or projected thermal comfort impact, and then push those out to the work order system. And so I'm hopeful that, that this tool will be integrated in with their daily activities in order to help them optimize their basically their day-to-day activities. That they ideally is that we'll go from a point where they're reactively managing issues at these sites to proactively managing issues. So I think in terms of in terms of making the business case, I think initially the business case is really the energy savings. Specifically from the initial retro-commissioning and monitoring-based commissioning type efforts, but I think ongoing, I think we're going to see, real value in the program from being able to help, maintain the equipment and the systems at these buildings in a way that's, basically, keeps patients and people and doctors happy and comfortable and, with minimal to no disruption to, everyday activities in the hospital. And then the EMIS software, I'm hoping that again, the guys at the site will have access to it, but I'm thinking, and again, I think that will be the software platform I primarily interface with as the energy manager, and as we get alerts regarding higher energy consumption than expected, and then I would be interfacing with the facility staff at the sites to try to figure out why we're experiencing that.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Oh, great. Well, we've got a handful of questions coming in here from the attendees. Let's take a look down the list here. First is about the costs of ECMs and whether that factors in Beaumont's own labor costs if they're going to be implemented internally.
It depends on the type of ECM. Fortunately, we don't have to allocate labor costs for our facilities maintenance guys into our expense type projects, but for our capital projects, we generally have a project manager involved, and so we do need to be to consider their time as part of the total cost for a capital type project.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And then, again related, how many hours per week on average do you estimate the facility staff will need to work on the project to help the consultant during initial setup?
That's a really good question because we're in the middle of that right now. I would say the range is anywhere from 0 to 8. So I'd say to date, the consultant has been on site at all of the sites, well, 3 times, but 2 times really in a working capacity. And so when they're on site, they're on site maybe for 2 to 3 days total. But our consultant in particular is pretty independent, so they really don't need a lot of the staff time beyond maybe maybe a couple hours of interviewing and then being led to the various mechanical rooms. During the times they aren't on site, their interaction with them has been pretty minimal, and so really the interaction to date has been with our IT department and getting the IT piece set up, and then also working with our project management team to coordinate with IT and manage the installation of the data drops at the various control panels. So actually the facility site guys haven't had a lot of time spent on this project to date. I think where we're going to get a little bit more time spent is in reviewing energy conservation measures, but again, that can sometimes only be like an hour or 2 for that review of the energy conservation measures, and then eventually the training on the software. But really in the first 3 years, the way we've got it set up with our current consultant is that during the first 3 years, is that our consultant is going to be managing the FDD software, and then working with the staff to make sure that they understand how it works, and helping us to identify the prioritize the faults that are identified. So to date, I'd say there's not been a lot of on-site staff allocation toward the program, but I do foresee it increasing in the future.
Okay, great. Good time for maybe one, or maybe we'll squeeze in 2 more questions. I think it's a great model that you've presented. I suspect that half of the attendees on this call will go off and try and copy it straight away. And I'm wondering, what would be the golden nuggets of advice you would give them? What are the lessons you've learned along the way, or things that you wish you'd known before you started?
I guess a couple things. We wrote up like I said in the presentation, is I basically took the technical specifications document straight from the website, and I copied and pasted it into a Word document and edited from there. One thing I wish I had done was I put that into a table and asked the respondents to rate how well they could perform each activity, because that some of the respondents we got did that, and that was very helpful. And then especially it was very helpful in comparing the responses in general. So I think that's one thing I would have, in doing it again, I would have asked for more of a matrix response from the respondents themselves. Secondly, I think the one thing I didn't realize going into this was the amount of IT involvement, and then also the amount of understanding of what needed to be done in terms of getting to the point where we can even plug in like the FDD devices to get data flowing out of our network and onto the cloud. And so, really sitting down with the consultant ahead of time and talking about what that's going to be, and maybe their approach to that, and in maybe the interview process, I think would be very, very helpful, just so that you're aware of like the timeline and the potential cost that is basically going to be dollars spent towards just getting the system up and running, as opposed to spent towards something that will actually save you energy.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, we get a lot of questions on the IT side. It's there's a lot of potential there. Well, we are on the hour. Again, I'd say thank you very much, Edna, for your presentation today. For all the attendees, this recording and the slide deck will be available on the website, possibly today, but certainly by the end of day tomorrow. Thank you, Hannah, for setting up and prepping all the introduction slides and getting everything queued up. Thanks to all of you who attended today. Have a good day.